السيدات والسادة، أهلاً بكم ومرحباً في قاعة المحاضرات في متحف المستقبل. يسرنا أن نستكمل معكم جلساتنا الحوارية لليوم الأول من منتدى دبي للمستقبل. والآن مع جلسة حوارية بعنوان كيف يفكر خبراء استشراف المستقبل، وتستضيف دكتور بول سافو الأستاذ المساعد في جامعة ستانفورد، وآدم كين مدير شركة ريوس بارتنرز للاستشارات.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the main sessions of the Dubai Future Forum. Starting now, a fireside chat titled What's Behind a Life in Foresight, featuring Dr. Paul Saffo, Adjunct Professor at Stanford University, and Adam Kane, Director of Reos Partners.
Good. Welcome, everybody. And I am thrilled to see that this room is full, because if you'd walked in here 20 minutes ago, it was about 0 degrees centigrade, and that you all have warmed up this room completely even before you've said a word. So welcome. We have 30 minutes with Adam Kahane here. I'll do the briefest of interviews, and then we will dive right into a conversation. Questions. There are going to be mic runners in the room. We obviously, the more time we ask questions, the less time we get with Adam. But we'll have mic runners ready at all times, and if you have a question in the middle of the conversation, raise your hand, we'll get a mic to you, and the like. We're not going to do that. Save the questions to the very end, though. If you have questions at the very end, we'll take those. So just a quick word about Adam. Adam's a director at Reos Partners. He's an organizer, a designer, a facilitator, who guides stakeholders through the rapids of the hairiest challenges you can possibly imagine. I think the best way to understand what he does, the best way to understand what he does, go on the web. There's this thing called digital media, and you get more details. But he's written 5 books, and I think the titles of the books really tell what you do. They are Solving Tough Problems, Power and Love, Transforming Scenario Planning, Collaborating with the Enemy, and Facilitating Breakthroughs. And as I understand, there's another book in the works. Do you share the title with us?
Everyday Habits of Systems Transformers.
Whoops, close subject to my heart. Systems, really important stuff. Good, so we'll dive into it. The one other thing I should say, he has received many, many honors. He's received the Order of Canada, the World Economic Forum, which I like to think of as the Dubai Future Forum of Europe, has showered him with honors. And a secret award, so who in this audience considers themselves a futurist? Okay. Secret award, it has been given to the smallest number of people. It is the highest honor in futures, and that is being a member of the Order of the Dodo. And he might even explain it. So let's dive into it, Adam. And so the way I've structured this is we're going to talk about 3 words. The first word is love. But before we talk about that, just say a little bit about how you approach your view of foresight.
Well, I don't consider myself a futurist.
Me neither.
This is the first Futures conference I've gone to, but I use futures as a way to help people work together in the present. Which is that I used to be in the scenario group at Shell in the late 1980s, and during the time I was an employee there, there was a group of leaders in South Africa that wanted to use the Shell scenario method to think about the transition from apartheid to democracy. And they did a very interesting thing. They composed a scenario team, not of futurists or experts or university academics, but of leaders from across the system, black and white, opposition and establishment, left and right, business, government, civil society. And that's the process that became known as the Montfleur scenario exercise. And that's how I got into this work. I fell in love with that, the possibility of systemic transformation. I fell in love with this way of working, which I'd never heard of. I also fell in love with the organizer of the project. So This is our 30th anniversary trip here in Dubai. So I tell
for all lonely heart futurists out there.
I tell young people you can only do this with 1 or 2 projects. Yeah. But the learning from Montfleur, this is the thread I've been following for the past 30 years, which is doing futures work not with analysts or staff people or professional futurists, but with leaders from across the system. Doing futures work not as a way to predict or adapt to what will happen, but as a way to create what will happen, and doing this not just with friends and colleagues, but with strangers and opponents, including with people you don't agree with or like or trust. And that's the work I've been doing for the last 30 years, 32 years. And the question I've been asking throughout all this work all around the world is, what does it take to collaborate across deep differences to be able to create a better future? And all of my work, all of my reflection, all of my writing is trying to answer that question. What does it take? And the reason we've structured this conversation, as Paul said, is I think in summary, it takes the capacity to work with 3 drives, 3 human drives: love, power, and justice.
Spoiler alert. You weren't
Yeah.
supposed.
Okay, yeah.
Good. So let's talk about love.
Yeah. So I'm using the word love in this context, meaning the drive to unity, the working on the situation as a whole. And in a way, that's the first thing that happens when you're convening a group from across the system. The first move is a love move, in the sense that you're bringing together parts of the system that are siloed or apart or fighting with each other to think together about the situation they share. And the best example I can think of that is the COP coming up in a few days. I was at the COP last year in Sharm el-Sheikh, and the first thing about that meeting that struck me was that, in one sense, everybody was there because of a concern about the whole. The whole phrase, keep 1.5 alive, is a phrase about the whole and how can we work together to achieve this objective. And the reason this is crucial, to work with this drive to unity, is because of the reality of interdependence, which is obvious in the case of climate, but also obvious in all other systems. This was the thing that struck me in visiting the UAE museum 2 nights ago, was this drive to unity. And on the other hand, the reason why it's not straightforward to work with love is because when you say we're going to work on the whole, there's no such thing as the whole. There's not one thing called the whole. Is the whole the community of futurists that are gathered in this room? Is the whole the people that have worked on scenarios in California? Is the whole Reos? Is the whole the UAE? Is the whole the GCC? So because it's not straightforward to work with love.
Well, also, when there we go. In your work, as I read your work, I think of love is the longing of the separated to be back together. And you're, by definition, working in these fractured areas, and it seems like the magic of what you do is you remind the separate pieces that they really long to be together.
Yes, that's the definition of love I'm using is exactly it, the drive to the unity of the separated. And that's not the only thing that's important, but it's often the starting point. I mentioned to you when we spoke a few weeks ago that I've been working this year with a group of US and Chinese officials, and one of the things that struck me in the midst of this very difficult and very dangerous conflict between their countries, is underneath that, what struck me was the sadness and longing about the separation. So yes, that's the feeling, and working with heterogeneous groups, including groups in civil war or groups fighting over conflict or groups from different cultures, that drive to reconnect is the first drive to tap into.
And it seems like not just the drive to reconnect, but a key part of your magic is reminding people that they actually desperately want to reconnect and kind of getting over that hump. Because, I think of a lot of love, like, think of W.H. Auden's poem, September 1, 1939. And he wrote, "We must love each other or die."
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful poem, but it feels like someone's trying to tell you, well, you better love or you're in trouble. Your approach is much different, saying you're revealing something that's already there that they can't see in their anger. Or not.
No, that's correct. No, my disagreement is not with that, but with the word magic, because I don't think there's anything magical about it at all.
He was trained as a physicist,
Yeah.
so yes, okay.
And so if the word love is confusing, then it's the word interdependence, that
Interdependence.
That not all situations, but I'm talking about situations where we can only address the challenges we face if we can find a way to work together, even though we may not agree with or like or trust each other. So that's the first of the three dimensions.
Yes, and we should go to the second term, because time is flying.
Yeah.
Power.
So the reason I became interested in power is I noticed that the discourse in futures work, in systems work, in facilitation work, is all in this first domain, the domain of unity, the domain of what's the whole, how do things work, what's the right thing to do for the good of the whole. And I think that's crucial, but to me it's obvious that it's not enough. Martin Luther King Jr. famously said, "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic." And I think it's really impossible to understand what's going on or what to do about what's going on without also looking at power, which I define as the drive of everything living to realize itself. And at the COP, this was also dramatically evident. I don't know how many of you have been in these meetings, particularly the Blue Zone, where there are literally hundreds of people proposing and postulating and protesting and advocating for the solution or the interest that they hold dear. So you can't understand what's going on around climate and why it's so difficult if you don't also pay attention not just to the whole, but to the interests and ambitions and drives of each part. So the reason we can't work without power is to work without power would be to ignore the reality of self-interest.
And as I look at your work, when love and power come together, it brings to mind two other terms that seem to be the daughter of those. I'm thinking of collaboration and transformation.
Yes. So my experience in South Africa, I later thought of it as being like you're looking at a landscape at night and there's a flash of lightning, and for a minute you can see it.
Right.
And so what I saw in that minute in South Africa 32 years ago was that it is possible to collaborate, even among people that don't agree with or like or trust each other, in order to transform the system. In that case, the political, economic, social system of South Africa. In the case of COP, the global system. So yes, what I've been trying to understand ever since that flash of lightning is what's involved in collaboration for transformation.
But as I think you've observed, that collaboration that doesn't harness power is not going to transform anything.
Yes, it's literally true that nothing happens without power, zero. So I find this idea that, well, power is an unfortunate thing, this political thing, let's just put it aside, talk about the good of the whole. This to me is nonsensical. And that's what King was referring to when he said, love without power, or love ignoring power, or love denying power is sentimental and anemic. It makes for lovely slides, no change in the world. So that idea that we need to work both with power and love is how I got started.
So let's back up to the definition of power. I know you really love Paul Tillich's definition. Share that with us.
Tillich defines power as the drive of everything living to realize itself. So it's that sense of that drive to growth, to destiny, to ambition, which is in every person, every organization, every society. And of course, when you have different actors or different stakeholders or different countries, each with a drive to power, there will be competition and conflict. And my point is, we need to work not just with unity, with the whole, with the good of the system, but also to be able to work with power.
So as I think of your notion of power, another word comes to mind even beyond Tillich's definition, and that's purpose. That I think you once said power is the ability to achieve purpose.
Yes.
That it has an end.
Yes, that was, it's King who said that, and King was arguing as a religious person that love is not enough. The quote I gave started with the sentence you've just given, that power properly understood is nothing but the ability to achieve purpose. So yes, these are the first two drives, and I argue that it's impossible to do the kind of work we say we're trying to do, which is not just to observe the future, but to shape the future without the ability to understand and work with both love and power.
How does one avoid the abuse of the power when it's discovered?
So, power without love is reckless and abusive.
Love, yes.
Yeah. So that's why power alone is not enough. That's why attention to the whole is also important. But that's also where the third element comes into it.
Let's bring in justice.
I wrote a book called Power and Love, and I wasn't really clear on the role of justice in this, but it was always nagging in my mind, amongst other reasons, because the Tillich book I've been quoting from has the title Power, Love, and Justice. So I always wondered where justice fit into this. And I now think that it's the third piece of the puzzle. It's the structure that enables everybody both to connect and to realize themselves. And again, this was obvious at COP. From the very first COP, from the signing of the Framework Convention on Climate Change, the most difficult part, it will be difficult again in 2 days, is the fairness. Justice is the drive to reduce unfairness. And from the beginning of the climate issue, the question of what was then called common and differentiated responsibilities, what's more recently been called just transition. How do we make these changes, not just with a sense of what's needed for the good of the whole, of keeping 1.5 alive, not just that suits the interests of the different countries and companies and other actors, but to do it in a way which is just. And this is not at all easy because there are different understandings of what is fair and unfair. So I now think that we can't do the work that that was introduced in the first session this morning about creating a better future without the ability to work with these three fundamental universal human drives which are in permanent tension. That's why it's not straightforward or neat or easy.
Does justice have to be, take COP in the next meeting, does justice have to be solved up front, or can it be interfingered into the process? I know you quote Amartya Sen around that sense of injustice. Do you have to get it out of the way first before you can have collaboration?
Well, I think that's an important question. I'm not sure in any of these things there's a sequence, but last night somebody said to me that if there is in such a situation, whether COP or some other situation, a lack of acknowledgement of injustice, then the emphasis will be on redress rather than transformation. So if there is a sense, which there has been for 27 COPs, that the North is saying, well, we'll get to that later, but could we just all agree to this keeping 1.5 alive? That is not good enough. And if people think that the injustice or the unfairness they perceive is not being taken seriously and not being addressed, they will refuse to participate. And climate is the example of a general phenomena, which is where if some people don't participate, we can't make progress.
So as I think about COP and exactly that conversation, and I think about some of your other work, the work in Guatemala, South Africa, you're actually doing interesting things in Hawaii right now. It's almost, I mean, to take a futurist perspective or a time perspective, the folks in the North says, can we just get to 1.5? Yeah. And that's like, let's just fix the present.
Right.
And the view of those who are saying, wait, we got to work about justice versus saying, this isn't about the present. This is about transforming the future. So is it really that a conversation is going on that both sides have very different time frames?
Well, and it's also not just about the future and the present, but the past, which is, hey, we didn't burn all this, we didn't put all this carbon in the air, you did.
Yes.
So,
well, as we say, you know, in the United States, we stole it fair and square.
Yeah.
That was a joke.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, so none of this is straightforward. Love is not straightforward because there is not one whole. Power is not straightforward because different actors are trying to achieve different things. And justice is not straightforward because there's different ways of thinking about what is fair and unfair. The main point I'm making is that if you aren't willing and able to wrestle with all three of these dynamics, you will not be able to peacefully create a better future.
So let's do this. I made the offer. If there are people who have questions, we will take them. The trick is that there's shining very bright lights in our eyes down here, so I really can't see when someone raises their hand. Where are the mic runners? There, okay. So if you hand it to someone, wave at me so I know which direction to look. And think about the following in the sort of last 6 minutes we have, besides questions. I'd like to just give the audience a little flavor of what it's like when you walked into the situation in Guatemala, or pick your area so people understand this is deeply emotional stuff. This is not some austere process. So is there someone with a question? Okay, yes, please. Say your name and ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Sarah Bawazir from Khalifa University. Thank you for this warm fireside chat. My question is actually to you both, Professor Saffo and Professor Kahane. You talked about literature and you quoted those beautiful quotes. And it reminds me of a song called Where is the Love by Black Eyed Peas. And actually, if you reflect on the lyrics, it's still relevant today. So, in your foresight, do you think we will see a world with more love or more conflict, keeping in mind climate change? I know countries are doing their best, but also resource depletion. These are all like inflammatory agents. And so with all of that, is there a way we can make systemic change for more love, or are we doomed? Thank you.
Are we doomed?
So I don't know if we're doomed. I'm hopeful, but I would not answer that all we need is love, to quote another song.
Yes.
I think this is, I believe this is incorrect. And the main point I'm making is what we need is more love and more power and more justice, and these are in tension, and this is why it's not straightforward. I find the COPs, of course, frustrating, but also inspiring, because these three elements are front and center. You don't have to dig around. They're all there all the time. And 70,000 people are coming here to try to work this through. I don't know whether they or we will succeed, but I know in order to succeed, that's what will be required.
And I just add to that two thoughts. The first one is, pessimists, and I've been in the foresight business for over 30 years. You might say I'm a futurist with the past. And what I've learned over time is that pessimists are often right, but in general, optimists get more done. And so I don't think it's whether we're doomed or not. I think it's an amazing situation. I think we're lost. And that's actually quite a beautiful state. That we're lost and we're trying to find ourselves. And if we work the stuff out with COP and we work out with the other things, we really, really will transform ourselves and our world into something quite amazing. And that's why I absolutely love the work this man does. You have 3 minutes to tell us just a little bit about what it's like to be on the ground in these meetings.
Because of this first, arising out of this first experience 30 years ago, the particular the emphasis of the work of me and my colleagues has been a systemic transformation in context of difference and conflict. For example, you asked for an example. I think that the one that comes to mind is the work we've done over many years in the country of Colombia, including during the brutal civil war, where we had in 9 days of workshops all of the actors, including the government and the military and the church and the business community and the environmentalists and the armed guerrillas, the FARC and the ELN and the so-called self-defense forces. So all of the actors in the violent drama. And I think what I noticed at one point that when I looked around the room, it was about 30 people in those 9 days of meetings. Maybe half of them had lost a member of their immediate family to the conflict. And they were the ones who were most trying hardest to find a way forward. And of course, because the conflict was so severe and bitter and long and dangerous, there was a sense that this really mattered. And therefore, we needed to really try to find a way forward, which in the case of Colombia occurred. The person who organized that process in 1996, Juan Manuel Santos, later became president of Colombia, got the Nobel Peace Prize in 2016, and in receiving the Nobel Peace Prize referred to those workshops as being a significant event on the road to peace. And I asked him why he kept referring to these workshops that had occurred 20 years before, and he said something which I consider very important, and I'll just end with this. He said, the reason I so often remember those workshops is that that's when I learned that contrary to all of my political and cultural and educational upbringing, it is possible to work with people you do not agree with and will never agree with. And I think this is the mistake many of us make because we think of it as an intellectual activity. We think, no, we need to agree each step before we can take the next. This is incorrect. This isn't how things work. And this is what gives me hope. It's not easy, it's not straightforward, it's not neat, but it can be done. I've seen it with my own eyes. It can be done, and it must be done.
On that note, thank you.